this topic is near and dear to me for a number of reasons. Just to kick off and introduce myself. So Carl Dorwart. So I lead Factor's life sciences, healthcare, consumer staples practice. Factor is an integrated law company. For those of you that don't know Factor, we really blend the traditional expertise of what I would call old law with kind of tech-enabled efficiency of new law, and then the alignment to the business of in-house legal. So, we've built this platform that we call Integrated Law. Keir and I have known each other for, I want to say, almost 2 decades. Why I also say this is near and dear to my heart is, one, I've got to see how Keir has grown in his journey, reached the goal that he is now as CEO of Blue Sphere Bio. I've also had the opportunity to engage with a lot of my former law school classmates who are always calling me and saying, "Hey, Carl, got a great role, typically at big pharma. Really want to know how I can get that cool job that Keir has." So what we want to talk to Keir about are, the cool things, the not cool things, spend some time with him on his journey, and also address what I see a lot in some of the conferences I go to that are not just life sciences, but always lawyers getting together and trying to figure out, how can we be closer to the business, how we can be more integral to the business. We're spending a lot of time as a cost center, the yes or no man, not actually advising. And that's what we want to be doing. That's what our companies want us to do. So we're going to cover a bunch of different topics. But Keir, can you give us a little bit of, I love what your company's doing. Could you give me a little bit of background about that? And then I would just want, kind of kick into sort of how you got to Blue Sphere.
Sure.
So yeah, I'll turn it to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Carl, and thanks for inviting me this afternoon. It's also funny that we're doing this about half a mile away from each other today. So yeah, as you mentioned, I took over the CEO role at Blue Sphere Bio in October of last year. So it's been a few months. I had been there almost 2 years before taking over that role. We are a TCR T-cell company that's developing novel therapeutics to treat hematologic malignancies and solid tumor. And we use T cells that we engineer with TCRs that we use a proprietary platform to discover, and then we'll give those cells back to patients who have certain types of cancers. Our first in human trial, we hope to begin this year and hope to file an IND, hoping the middle of the year, end of Q2, and that will be in patients with high-risk leukemias in combination with stem cell transplant. And the company was founded out of the University of Pittsburgh, and interestingly, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which is one of the larger healthcare systems in the country, has its own venture fund, own venture investment fund, and they have invested they've invested 115 million into Blue Sphere Bio to date.
That's great. So, we'll talk a little bit more about financing and sort of how, again, when you thought about what it would be to transition from a legal role into a business role and then into a CEO role, the kinds of things that you have to think about. I know, I talked about this earlier today, the amount of time probably spent on, how do we get money? What do we need to do to get the money? And then when we get it, what do we do with it? It's probably a big part of your day. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, just for the audience that hasn't stalked you on LinkedIn, to just, again, you've had a really interesting career. I think folks, I know a lot of my classmates were, are jealous sort of, because you've kind of you've taken the steps that they'd like to take, but maybe don't know how to, or don't understand the risks associated with them or the benefits. Although the benefits are always like, if we IPO, yay, but that's not always realistic. So
those are the obvious benefits. Yeah.
Yeah. So share with us the sort of your journey briefly, and then
sure.
I've got 30 more questions for you.
Yeah, no, great. So I had, as you know, a somewhat circuitous route to where I got. I actually, post college, started my career in pharma and device sales. I worked for a company called Or Pharma. I had no idea how to sell anything. It was a new drug in a new setting, and they gave us a phone book and some marketing materials and said, "Go hit your number." We sold that company to J&J within my first year, and I stayed at J&J selling for almost another 6 years, kind of moving up through the sales ranks. And like kind of early on in my career, I knew I wanted more and wanted to be in management, and was, had gotten the small pharma startup taste and then saw what J&J was about. And maybe it's telling, but it, rather than go to business school, which they offered to pay for, I said, no, I'm going to go to law school at night while I work full time. So that's what I did. And then I kind of had no intention of practicing because I was like so sort of business driven. And like halfway through, I have a science background. And halfway through, I don't think I'd ever even seen a patent before, but somebody was like, out of a law school class of 90, I was one of, 2 kids or 3 kids who had science or engineering backgrounds. They said, you could be a patent lawyer. So I kind of pivoted, and that's what I did. And left J&J after I graduated law school and went to work as for a patent firm, a great patent firm in New Jersey. Um, uh, and really focused there on 2 things: transactions, mostly on the buy side for large med devices, and molecular diagnostics companies. Some immuno-oncology was early then, but some therapeutic companies as well, generics. And I also litigated a lot. I did a little bit of patent prosecution, enough to know how to do patent prosecution, but my practice was really split between transactions. And then, as life takes us down certain roads, I was maybe a year away from partner, and decided that I wanted to do something else other than sit in a law firm for the rest of my life. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But so I did. I made a switch and I took a pay cut, and I got a job as the head of IP at a company called Advaxis, which was and is today a publicly traded company. They're kind of at a different point now than they were when I was there. But at one point, we had almost $1 billion valuation there. And I started as the head of IP, and then kind of just, probably something we'll talk about, but learned a lot about biotech and how biotech pharma, really works. Spent a couple of years there, and then moved to a company called Oncosec, which is also a publicly traded oncology company. And I started there. I made that move because it broadened my legal role from, kind of officially from head of IP to head of legal, doing all of the legal work, as well as head of business development. So that was sort of like me starting to come full circle in my genesis after about 9 or 10 years of leaving law school. And then after a really intense couple of years and raising over $100 million and doing clinical collaborations and some strategic deals, I decided to hang up or at least I thought, hang up my legal cleats and go into the cell therapy space, which is very interesting from a therapeutic standpoint. Those of us who are in the industry know that. And I took a job as the head of senior vice president. Again, I took a pay cut, so you can sense a trend.
Yeah.
And so for all my pay cuts, they do sort of pay off in the long run. But promoted to general counsel, and at Oncosec, then came here to Blue Sphere, to senior VP of business development and strategy, no legal role. and then was promoted to like chief business officer within 6 months, and then CEO about a year later. So, and here we are today.
Yeah. So one of the things I do want to circle back to, which I think would be relevant to the audience, you had mentioned to me over coffee at our favorite local spot, when I was mentioning, look, there's lots of in-house lawyers that have fantastic backgrounds, great pedigree.
Yeah.
They don't know how to sort of take that next step. And one of the things you mentioned that resonated with me is, or two things. One, you said, take the first relevant job that will allow you to grow. So I want to talk about what that means to you. And then, per your kind of pay cut, you raised a great point, which was think of these opportunities as a fellowship, like in medicine, like you've got this great foundational background, but not in the areas, in one area, whereas in a biotech, especially as a GC, you have to wear the hat of, depending on how big, again, the organization is, you're chief IP lawyer, your chief regulatory lawyer, your chief patent, it's everything, it's employment. So when you say take that relevant job that allow you to grow, talk to me about sort of how you went about that process.
Yeah, and I think obviously big companies are structured differently, right? So if we're talking about in-house roles and not outside counsel roles, which I could also address if you like, but I think obviously I think we all know that bigger companies are a lot more risk averse than smaller companies, right? So I think in-house counsels have a tendency to get siloed into a particular position, right? So like if you're a patent lawyer and you're a transactional patent lawyer, you're going to be siloed in a lot of cases from the litigation group, right? And you may have nothing to do with your securities group. So you could have an amazing, you could have a brilliant career at an amazing company and, be an expert in one thing, right? Like become that neurosurgeon with a very narrow focus, but you might not be running like a big company, right? And they're all good, but if I would say, like, if you're sitting there and you are, you're a due diligence lawyer, you're a transactions lawyer, right? Or you are a patent lawyer or a contract lawyer, and you're like, hey, I'd like to be a GC of a, small to mid-sized company or a business executive. I think kind of different than big companies, we'll wear a lot of hats in small biotech, right? Like I can remember when at Oncosec, when we set up our office, the CEO and I were assembling office furniture together in the middle of like a $30 million raise. We were like literally had our iPhone propped up, was talking to a banker and an investor while we were putting IKEA furniture together in the office. It's a true story. And so, but just by doing that, you learn, right? And I think what you do is you try to find the right situation, and our markets change, right? Our capital markets change, and what we do in biotech, unfortunately, because we're not revenue generating, med tech is a little bit different, but and consumer is a little bit different, but we're dependent on our ability to raise capital. And so that I would say, if you're looking to make that move, not that I'm trying to recruit people away from big companies, but find the openings, right? And be willing to say, okay, I could spend a year there or 18 months there and figure out what they do and figure out what drives their business. Like if you're a regulatory lawyer that wants to be a general counsel, go spend time with the securities people, right? Read their 10Ks and their 10Qs and their 8Ks and talk to their comp people and understand how to structure a compensation plan. The more you think about what skills and knowledge can you put in your own repertoire, the more market, then the next one, then you become more of a generalist, right? If there's a deal team and you're a focused lawyer, try to get on the deal team. spend time with other, I mean, I learned a lot just from doing financings, because when you do diligence on a financing, it's like a top down, it's just like M&A. And so you really do get an opportunity to learn a lot.
So I know myself, having, practiced law, been a litigator, shorter stint, but I went a pretty direct route, right? So I think when I moved into my role, well, I've had a number of commercial roles, sales focused roles, found that I love the intersection of innovation and law, and just trying to do things better, quicker, faster, more efficient for, especially around complex transactional work. One of the things, for me, it was kind of easy to flip that switch, but I have to imagine, coming out of your, both litigation and transactional background, and then business development role, what transferred from sort of your legal role to your biz role and then CEO role, and what transferred, what's the hardest to shake, right? Because you're now wearing a completely different hat.
I'll answer your last question first. The hardest thing to shake is thinking like a lawyer, right? Like, I'm sure if they, for the people listening, our respective spouses, life partners, et cetera, probably all, know that we still think like lawyers, because it's, ingrained in us from very young. So I think, it can actually be a detriment sometimes if you don't know how to harness it. But I think going back, you and I spoke a little bit about this. I think making a switch from being outside counsel at a firm to inside counsel is like a first level of sort of becoming less risk averse. And then if you move beyond a legal role into a business role, then it's even different. And your thought process has to evolve. So one of the things that, and I actually hire my outside counsel now based on this, which is, when you're outside counsel at a big firm, it's your job to assess risk and give the client options and say, if you do A, these things could happen. If you do B, these things could happen. And this is what we think the probability of them happening is. This is how much it'll cost us to settle that or fix it, right? But you're never the one actually responsible for making the decision. You're only responsible if you don't outline all of the potential risks, right? It's like issue spotting in a law school exam. When you get into an inside role, it's different, because you realize, like, when you're outside counsel, your job is to not get in trouble, right? Not get your client in trouble. When you're in-house, your job is to move the business forward, whatever the business may be. And I think that that's where smart in-house lawyers can make a really good reputation for themselves, right? It's like, you can give me a million reasons why I shouldn't do something, or why I should, design a clinical trial or shouldn't design a clinical trial a particular way. But at the end of the day, we have patients and we have shareholders and we have capital demands, and there's a Venn diagram, and somewhere in the middle is the right decision, but there's no decision without risk. And so the closer you get in a legal role in-house to the decision makers, the more risk you have to be willing to assume. Then when you become the decision maker or part of a board that's making the decisions and you're advising the board, then you're like, you're sort of taking a leap there, right? Then that paradigm has really flipped, because, anybody who's on this call who's been in a boardroom or a CEO's office trying to get a deal done, they're not always worried about risk, depending on what the situations are. And I think being a lawyer, especially being a litigator, gives you a really good perspective on what to do and what not to do. So, like I say that there's certain third rails, for the subway riders on the call. There's certain things that you shouldn't take risk on. And I think those are things like, securities, anything that affects patients' well-being, product integrity. You're leading a team, your regulatory people, your product development people, your quality assurance people, your securities lawyers, they're your best friends. And really understanding, like, where don't you want to take risk? You don't want to take risk with the SEC. You don't want to take risk in something that can harm a patient. And it sounds cliche, but I always have said, if in the life sciences sector, and I include med tech, diagnostics, if you do what's in the best interest of the patient, it's almost always, if not always, the right decision for the business, whether that be short or long term. So I think you learn that being a lawyer and getting a lot of experience as a lawyer, so yeah.
So speaking of the experience with a lawyer, I've got to assume there's value, but would you, if there are again, trying to help the market of people that are thinking about, how do I transition into a GC role? How do I, and then potentially move into a business role? Would you find, or did you find your kind of stint in the middle where it wasn't legal and it wasn't CEO, but it was business development? Do you think that obviously it helped you, but do you think it was critical to your success and your ability to get on your new role?
Yeah, 100%. And it's a great question, because I got to the point where I was able, obviously I had outside counsel, who was keeping us safe and keeping, I don't want to give this thing like it's like the Wild West. It's a highly controlled and regulated environment, and you have to know the red lines that you don't want to get near. But so I think what all that experience got me to was being able to run a deal by myself, like not with a team, but being able to lead a deal, whether that was a public financing or a pipe or a strategic or a clinical collaboration. Sort of being able to say, like, everybody has to do something for a first time, right? Okay, I have to review somebody asks for a set of manufacturing SOPs. Well, if you're a patent lawyer, like, I didn't know what a Gantt chart was until I started in pharma, because, like, if you're a lawyer, the partner puts something on your desk and says, I need this by 6. That's your Gantt chart, right? So you learn a lot. Right. But I think that intermediate experience, Carl, like taking a process from start to close and starting with a simple process and, getting and closing that really helps to sort of build your own skill set.
Yeah. So kind of as a follow-up to that, we talked about this a bit as well in preparation over some craft coffee. How would you, because some of your roles, there were more lawyers, but a lot of the last few, either you were the guy or had to figure it out. How did you prioritize what to focus on, both as a lawyer and now as a CEO?
Yeah, I think now that I have a business focus, like my motto hasn't changed. But our space, right, just to give a little bit of context, the pandemic era, biotech and life sciences in the public, in the markets, not just the public markets, enjoyed a very good 2 years. And there was a lot of liquidity and there was a lot of money put into that space. And by January of this year, well, no, now we're in 23. Sorry, that last year, you really saw a contraction of that. We saw, like, during its high points, we saw IPOs being oversubscribed. So you'd have Series C investors come in, they would already have their stake in a future IPO locked up. So there was no more room in the IPO. There was literally people with money. It's not dissimilar from what happens in a housing market in a bidding war. The same thing was happening. And And now that's changed, right? And now that if you're a public company, I mean, you can just look at the contraction that we've seen in our space, right? Like every day it's another company laying off, prioritizing, streamlining. And I think, like I've said this in other interviews, it's like there's a lot of noise in our industry. There's always a lot of noise in every industry, whether it's tech or consumer. But I think, biotech can be, especially small biotech, can be somewhat speculative. But the focus really should be on putting, obviously you go to a company for a reason. They have a technology that you like, that you believe in. The goal should be to get that into the clinic and generate data in a smartly designed clinical trial that will benefit your patients, that will also give you short, medium, and long-term inflection points that allow you to continue to capitalize that company while you're delivering that therapy. That is sort of like the touchstone. It's like when you lose your way because there's so much noise and people are throwing things at you. What about this one? That's the goal, right? Because now, if you're a small to mid cap biotech in the public or private space, that's what people care about. There's always outliers, right? But if you have a clinical program that can show data, even incrementally, then you may have something. And that needs to be the focus. And then you can look at, okay, well, what do I need to do to get that across the finish line? And then having that wide breadth of experience, like being a general counsel, having done FDA work and filed INDs, having run a quality group, capital Q quality and compliance group, having run IP, you sort of know then the pieces you have to put in place to do that. So
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about the clinical programs. We just because of the nature and specialization of my practice, we spend a lot of time working with companies around the clinical trial space, right? Helping them, get sites set up quicker, because obviously the sooner they can get the first patient in, get the trial up and running, especially as a lot of our companies are focused in oncology. It's potentially 30 to 40 days faster is potentially getting something life-saving to somebody 30 to 40 days quicker.
Yeah.
In doing that, we sort of, I find myself typically, or my team, sitting in between legal and R&D almost on a daily basis. Someone's paying the bill, but what I've always thought was great was when we get in the room together trying to solve for how do we, everybody wants to go faster. How do we go faster?
Right.
The two things that are never, it's the one time where legal aligns with the business, right?
Yeah.
Because that is the nature of the business, right? How do we get our products to the people that need them as fast as possible? But two, it's always interesting that there's never, but to your point about sort of those red lines, it's always, how do we do that, but not to the detriment of either the safety of the participants,
right,
or the overall success of the program. So it's, I get to see that interplay between the business and legal on a daily basis in the R&D space. I see it maybe also in the IP space, because again, you're trying to protect an asset, which is what ultimately is going to drive revenue when it's commercialized. But that those are the two areas where I really see that kind of alignment. So it's nice that you kind of brought that up. What if you think about, again, we talked about focus and prioritization. I think I know the answer because you've brought it up a couple of times, which I love, but what would you say is your number one priority as a CEO today? And do you think that priority will change at all in the next, let's say, 6 to 12 months?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think you have to think, you think about, so like it depends, right? Like, so today as a CEO of a company that's about to become a clinical stage company, our efforts are on, the company was founded in 2018. It was very young. It had a very academic sort of mentality. We had an amazing shareholder investor who kind of, allowed the company to grow without, constantly having to, hit artificial milestones to show that we were doing what we were supposed to be doing. now the focus is on building a clinical stage, publicly facing company where we're going to run a very, very complicated trial with a very complicated product that we hope has a lot of promise. And I think all of the things that go into that allow you, like, right, we're not raising money right now. We have a pretty decent runway, but your eye is like always focused on that, right? And that, so I would think that, if there's, for people who are listening to this, that's a really critical thing. Like if you're in any space that's like drug development or device development, or where you're going to go before the FDA and it's not your area, I would say learn as much as you can about IND filings, what goes into an IND. I mean, it's really staggering how much this stuff costs. We without giving numbers, I was shocked when I came here, the cost just to make the drug product for this trial that we will run will cost more than the entire pivotal program at the last company I just came from. And that's a phase 1 study. So to that end, I think learning about finance, how do you like go to an investor conference, if you're sitting there and you're, a mid to senior mid-level lawyer at company X, or you're an outside counsel who wants to make a switch, like go to some of these healthcare conferences and banking conferences, listen to the pitches, listen to what investors are saying about the market, and pick out what's important. I also think doing things like continuing ed, there's some great programs and certificate programs that could help you bridge, right? If there's one, but I think you need to understand the regulatory drug development process, which was something I knew nothing about. And you need to, I think, understand the securities, like how does Wall Street work, right? We're so thankful for big pharma because they have the capital to invest in smaller companies that are innovating. Not that they're not innovating, but that they have it. But if you don't have that, then you have to get your money from somewhere. And those people typically hire the smartest people in the world to vet your technology.
Yep. What, again, so you had mentioned, like you said, October 2022. So pretty new to the CEO role. What if you could have, waved a wand and figured out one thing that you would have liked to have known in advance,
right,
of taking on the role? What do you think? What could you point to?
Yeah, it's funny, Carl. I think when we're lawyers, we spend years like refining our craft. We've got sorry if any of my former partners are listening, but we spend years with partners yelling at us, telling us, giving us red line documents and throwing them back at us and teaching us how to write. And you hone that craft and you write a brief and you write an argument and you practice it. And then you realize, like, when you're CEO, and we're not a small company, so we've got over 60 people, right? And we've got big lab space in Pittsburgh. So, I would say the biggest change is no longer being what I would call like an individual contributor. It's like, and that happens in your, like, as your practice evolves, right? Like I went from a patent lawyer to a general counsel, and so like I would have to review K's and Q's along with outside counsel, but I don't think I could write a patent application now if I had to, right? Or I could review them and look at the claims, but if I actually had to, you lose that skill. I think as a CEO, that's a hard thing to give up, right? Because you spend so long learning how to write, learning how to communicate, becoming an expert, right? To the neurosurgeon example, and now you're running the hospital, and after a while you lose that, but I guess that's the evolution. And then you have to hone different skills like management and aligning your folks.
Well, and to your point, I mean, again, also leading a practice, although I still, do have a big revenue number on my shoulders that I individually responsible for, but that's part of the fun. But it's also, to your point, I think it becomes even more critical to ensure that you're bringing in the right people around you to support you. And that also means from, because I know you and I have discussed this, that also means the way you're, handling your your legal work, because you now need to trust that the partners you're bringing in are able to not only do the work,
Yes.
protect your interests, but also give you an answer that allows you to further the business and move your products, through the clinical
Yeah.
stage, and
Not,
do it in a way that's not going to take advantage of all that capital you raised.
yeah, you raised a really good point, right? Because you all of a sudden realize when you're the CEO, and I mean, it's been a few months, but I had it too as a chief business officer. Like, you go from the protector to the protected, and it's like I talk about the bright red lines or third rails. Like, as a lawyer, I think we're just inherently neurotic, which is good. I mean, you want that in a lawyer. You don't want the lawyer to say, nah, it'll be fine. That's probably the wrong lawyer.
Right.
But
What's the worst that could happen?
yeah. But I will say, I worked for somebody who used to have like multiple law firms, right? And they would ask the same question and I never understood it. Like, important issues. And now I kind of get it. It's a lot of money. So maybe we don't always want to spend or have it, but when you go into big decisions, right? Like, oh, do we, and how do we structure this deal, or do we take this discount on a finance? It's good to have people like you said that you can really trust. And I'll just say, like, I think how you excel in business as a lawyer is by doing that for the executives, but also knowing what can you rush. Like, you can make a lot of mistakes in drug development if you rush. It happens I mean, it's just sometimes it can't be avoided, but there are other things in law that don't need as much time and attention as we always give them. Right. And I think, I won't get into detail now. Somebody can email me privately if they want to know my view on that. But, it's like, yeah, that's fine. Just do this. And I think being a litigator, having litigation experience, if there's, any type of litigation experience, you actually know what the risk is. Because at the end of the day, that's like one of your big concerns. It's like, can I get sued? And if I get sued, what does that lawsuit look like? And does it end on a motion to dismiss? Does it end at summary judgment after 6 weeks? Or am I $5 million in with some, Park Avenue firm? And I've been in all of those on both sides of it. So, I think sort of being able to say in a new role, like, you know what, you don't need to spend a lot of time worrying about this because it's very low risk, versus, hey, this is the one we need to bring in, like, the A team on to advise. That's a really, really important skill for someone who's looking to
Make that lead,
move
make that
into,
move.
into a business role.
Yeah. You made a interesting comment around, you used to be the person advising on the risk. Now you're the person that has to take the risk.
Yeah.
Or make the decision based on the risk.
Yeah. And that's when you have to divorce yourself from being a lawyer. No pun intended.
Yeah.
But because you don't want to be thinking that way, right? You want to be able to ask the right questions and assess the whole situation, right? At one time, being able to, I think, multitask in a lot of discrete areas is important.
So I did want to, this has been great. I mean,
Thanks, Carl.
I love it. I love spending time with you.
Me too.
I did want to see if there were any questions. I don't know if you had some late joiners. I don't know if there are any questions from the audience. Just give folks a couple of minutes if they want to chime in. We have a Q&A function. We'll also, figure out a way to make this available. This was recorded. You can always follow up with both of us for questions that maybe you don't want to share with the whole audience. But if there are, again, I think the tremendous value that Cure brings is being able to make the decisions both, professionally, but also, I would say emotionally, right? Because you have a family, you have to balance that ability to take a risk, still provide, sometimes take a step back or 2 steps back to go 3 forward. And I think that's probably, again, when we talk about lawyers, that's the hardest thing for someone that spends all their time analyzing and advising on risk, the hardest thing for, I mean, I had to cross that bridge as well, was determining, okay, can I actually do the thing that I tell other people they shouldn't do? Can I actually assume the risk and hope that it comes
Yeah.
out?
Yeah.
Oh, hey, this is a good question from another buddy who I recently had lunch with. Now that you are a CEO who was a lawyer, parens, what does good legal support look like?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think it's having somebody who tells me what I need to worry about and letting me know that, everything matters, right? Like, from a CDA through, a term sheet to a, stock purchase agreement, right? It all matters, but it doesn't always matter like to the C-suite and the board in terms of advancing the business. So I think it's having a sense of a prioritization of where the risk is. So like, I don't really want to hear from the partner at $1,200 an hour about edits to, a confidentiality agreement, unless it's some very material confidentiality agreement. Like, I expect that to be handled, by someone who's, right sized for that role. But I need that person to like shake me when there's really something in my way, and saying, now you're not going to do that because of this, because you don't know everything, right? That's one of the risks when you're the lawyer executive, is to think what the answer is. You really have to step back and get advice from your counsel on that. And I think, the ability to say, well, I have partners who are like, you don't need me to do that. I'm going to give that to, outsource that or give that to this person. But then when it's a big issue, they're always reachable Saturdays and Sundays, because we all know that this is not a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday thing. We work all the time. So I think I would say that prioritization of risk, like risk stratification. And I love it when I can get that person, like my protectors, on the phone at any time if there's something, keeping me awake at night.
Or across the table already drinking a bourbon with you.
That's right. That's right.
So I would actually add to that. You mentioned the prioritization. I think if I have, 100 conversations, I would say 80% of them are with either someone on the business who is a consumer of in-house legal services, or someone who is in a position to dictate what type of legal work gets done within a certain department. And that's where we see a lot of maybe still antiquated approach to that type of complex commercial work. It's firms and in-house counsel are starting to get much better at it because it's so prevalent in the market, but they're still looking for ways to prioritize what's the type of work that's the best and highest value to our internal clients and then to the corporation as a whole, which are obviously typically the same thing.
Right.
And getting away from every single thing needs my eyes on it. Even looking at types of work that, especially around contracts and contracting, that might not even be per se legal work. It's transactional work. It can be done in a repeatable fashion, but that is, when I mentioned earlier, for the people that join late, that is all these conferences I go to. It's always, how do we get the lawyer as better advisors, better business advisors, get them closer to the business, because that's what they want to do for their own careers professionally, so they can make a move like yours. But it's also what the organizations want to pay for. Like, bring your legal hat into the room, but think about our problem from a business perspective.
Yeah. Give me a solution. Give me a solution that's legally tenable. Don't bring me a problem, right? And then bring me an opportunity, right? It's like, you're patents, right? You get a cease and desist letter, or you send a cease and desist letter. Well, can we turn that into a transaction, right? If we're in the same space, it's like, don't say the sky is falling, go out and hire 3 white shoe firms to analyze it, like think about the business. And I think, part of the problem is, and I have to give the firms that I work with a lot of credit, is like, in the billing model, in a traditional billing model where senior partners are over $1,000 an hour and a third year associate is, 500 to 700. There's like this reticence to educate your lawyers about your business, your individual. I don't mean your sector, right? Like if you hire any of these big firms, they're going to know your sector. Do they know your business? Do they know what matters to you? And like the partners that I trust will say, you're not on the clock for this. If I have some, like I need to explain something to them so they understand it better or whatever. And so it's also a really good way to learn. It kind of goes back to the title of this talk, right? I learned a tremendous amount from my outside counsel when somebody gave me a task that I had no clue, what goes into a particular section of a document. My outside counsel would walk through it with me.
Yeah.
And then when I got the bill, I'd say, I'm not paying you for that, for helping me. And they'd say, oh, that's okay.
So actually kind of in line with that, I got another question, which I love. It's, asking, and I know might be, you have to think about this from a couple of your different roles, but how do you create a culture within your legal team to ensure they develop judgment? So it's not just, and they follow up with, most lawyers tend to look at every risk possible, but you need a lawyer to think like business people so the company can grow, but obviously balancing that with the material risk that could derail the company's plan. So how, what are your thoughts on, developing that judgment, and maybe even look from your own perspective, how you did it?
Yeah, for me, it was about litigation, right? It's like what, there's business risk and there's legal risk. So kind of addressing the legal risk. I don't always want my lawyer, like I want my our high level lawyers to tell me what business risk is because they've been doing it for 20 or 30 years and they understand it. But generally I want legal risk. And I think, when you review contracts or you draft patents, whatever, and you draft patent claims and you have these rules in your head and you just follow them and because it's good practice, like it's just good hygiene to do. But what's the risk? Like walk down the hall and ask the litigation partner, when was the last time you litigated this issue? Is it just some esoteric thing that I'm going to have 4 back and forths with my counterpart on the other side, neither of which has ever written a brief or, been to a hearing, which is okay. Most lawyers don't litigate, but that's where that risk assessment comes in. And look, if you're a big Fortune 50, 100, 500 company, my answer is very different because you have to be very risk averse.
Right.
We don't have the luxury of being that risk averse all the time, which is why, it's like somebody puts it in. I'm like, well, why did you rate that? I'm going to give you a hypothetical example. Just quickly, we were negotiating a contract and there was a section in the contract and there was a debate about whether the jurisdiction we were in recognized an African country as one of the banned countries under this particular provision. Now, if you're a global pharma company, that matters. If you're a pharma company who's going to do a 9-patient trial in 3 states in the US, how much money did you just spend with 4 comment bubbles in the side? That's what I'm talking about, right? It's like you have to know your audience and you have to know the deal and you have to know the context. Then you can give that right-sized advice.
Right. But I think that does make, you do raise a good point, which it also, it depends on where you are, right? Like, the nature of innovation is that it has to move as fast as it can without sacrificing, safety.
That's right.
Or violating some other regulatory scheme. And that's kind of where that to me, that judgment comes in. How do I satisfy those three concepts?
Right.
But I'm still doing my job as a lawyer.
Yeah. And you know what I say is like, I think maybe when we came up, maybe it was a little bit different, but ask, right? Just ask. Don't spend 3 go-arounds. Say like, hey, Kier, they pushed back on this, or hey, Carl, they pushed back on this. Does it matter?
Yeah.
Like if you're a younger lawyer, it's okay does it matter to you? We know what the legal answer is, but do I want to delay opening a site 5 weeks because of some esoteric issue that has 0 chance of becoming an issue? No, but I need to know when it is a real issue.
Right.
And again, I come back to, and it's a really easy guidepost, like if it's in the best interest of the patient, it's probably in the best interest of the shareholder. And at the end of the day, in life sciences, we're in the business of putting therapeutics and devices that are safe into patients that we hope make their lives better. That's what we do. And by doing that, we hope to deliver value to our shareholders. But that's why they trust us with their investments.
That's right. So I think we have time, 6 minutes. I'd have time for one more question if it gets fired in. Otherwise, again, really appreciate the time and both
Thanks, Carl.
sharing what you shared. I think I want to get a t-shirt. If it's in the interest of the patients, it's probably the right answer.
Yeah.
With the right decision. I feel like that's a good little side gig I might think about. I'll let you know.
Yeah.
So back to you on that.
I know a trademark lawyer.
Yeah, I know you do. But otherwise, again, I want to thank all the participants for joining, spending time with us. Thank you for those that asked questions. Great questions. And again, we will have some follow-up content that we'll share. I think there's some great lessons learned that we'll put into maybe a blog post and then give you access to, Kier and or me to help drive some of this forward. But again, thank you all for joining and Kier, love it, bud.
Thanks, Carl.
Have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it. Take care.
Take care.
Bye.